Did anyone here actually pay the deposit? Silence. Did anyone confirm the fireworks permit? More silence. That single question ended 10 years of being my family's personal bank account, and it started with 27 missed calls in 12 minutes, all arriving at exactly 3 o'clock on the 4th of July. I know the exact number because I counted them later, sitting on the tailgate of my truck at a boat launch in Montana, watching the sun catch the surface of a lake so still it looked painted on. My fishing rod was propped against the wheel well. A cooler of iced tea sat beside me, mostly untouched. The only sounds were water lapping against the dock and a loon calling somewhere across the lake. Then my phone lit up on the seat beside me. One call, then two more, then a wave of them, so fast the screen barely had time to go dark in between. My sister, my brother, my mother, all three of them trying to reach me at the exact same moment, like they'd planned it together, which, knowing them, they probably had. The strange part wasn't that they were calling. The strange part was that I knew, almost to the minute, when those calls would start. Have you ever been the one everyone leans on financially, year after year, and somehow still ends up being the one they complain about the most? Have you ever spent a decade trying to hold a family together with your own money, only to become the villain of every single family story afterward? For 10 straight 4th of Julys, I paid for every piece of my family's reunion, the ranch rental, the catering, the professional fireworks show, the little extras nobody remembers until the final bill shows up in July with a due date already passed. And somehow, every single year, I was still the one who ruined something. This year, I decided to change one thing. Actually, I decided to stop doing one thing. And at exactly 3 o'clock that afternoon, the consequences of that decision finally caught up with everyone but me. Before I tell you exactly what happened when my phone nearly vibrated itself off the tailgate of my truck, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. I love seeing how far this community stretches across the country. And let me ask you something else. Has your family ever treated your generosity like it was owed to them? Like a bill they never had to think twice about, but always expected you to quietly cover? Let me know below, because what happened at 3 o'clock started almost a year earlier, and I don't think a single one of them saw it coming. My name is Marcus. I'm 58 years old, and I own 3 hardware stores across the Texas Hill Country, the kind of business I built up slowly over almost 30 years, one delivery truck and one loyal customer at a time. I have 2 younger siblings, my sister Renee and my brother Kyle, and our mother, Loretta, who just turned 81 this past spring. Our father passed away 11 years ago, and the year after he died, I suggested we start a family reunion tradition on the 4th of July, something to look forward to instead of something to grieve. I rented a ranch property outside Fredericksburg, the kind with a big wraparound porch, a fire pit, and enough open land for the grandkids to run wild until sundown. That first year was simple. Burgers on a grill, a few sparklers from the gas station. Everybody together, nobody arguing, just glad to still have each other. At least, that's how it started. Over the years, the reunion stopped being about togetherness and slowly turned into a production nobody but me was funding. What began as a modest ranch weekend with burgers and sparklers gradually became something else entirely. The ranch got bigger and more expensive. The catering went from a backyard cookout to a full barbecue crew with a smoker trailer. The fireworks went from a box of sparklers to a professional pyrotechnics display, complete with a licensed operator and a safety perimeter that cost more than my first truck. One year, Kyle wanted a specific brand of cornhole boards flown in from some boutique company in Nashville. The next year, it was a live band for the evening, then a photo booth, then things I genuinely couldn't keep track of anymore. Renee wasn't much different. Every year came with a new list of must-haves, a particular caterer's smoked brisket, a custom dessert table, a rented ice cream truck for the kids that somehow cost $400 an hour. Even our mother had opinions about everything, despite never once reaching for her wallet. The ranch house needed a bigger porch. The fireworks needed to actually impress people this time. The food needed more variety for the grandkids who'd suddenly all become picky eaters overnight. Every single year, there was another expense waiting just past the last one, and every single year, I paid it. Not because anyone ever thanked me, because I genuinely believed keeping everybody together was worth whatever it cost. The strange thing was never really the money itself. It was how little appreciation ever came back with it. If the drive out to the ranch took too long in July heat, somehow I heard about it. If the smoker crew ran behind schedule, somehow that became my fault too. If a single firework in the display fizzled instead of exploding properly, I was the one who apparently should have checked the vendor better. I could spend thousands of dollars building the exact holiday my family said they wanted, and within a few hours, somebody would already have found a reason to be disappointed in me. At first, I told myself families are like that. A little friction is normal, especially with grown siblings who never quite stopped competing with each other. Then I told myself things would calm down once the grandkids got a little older. Then I told myself next year would finally be the year it clicked. But next year never looked any different. The complaints stayed. The criticism stayed. The quiet, unshakable assumption that I would handle absolutely everything, that stayed too, no matter how many years passed. Eventually, I noticed something I couldn't keep ignoring. Nobody ever asked how business had been that year. Nobody asked whether I actually wanted to host another reunion or whether the timing even worked for me. Nobody asked whether I could afford another increasingly expensive holiday on top of running 3 stores and trying to save for my own retirement. They only ever wanted to know one thing. Was everything already booked and paid for? That realization landed harder than any argument ever could. Slowly, uncomfortably, I started to understand something I really didn't want to admit to myself. They weren't excited to see me. They were excited to see what I was paying for. And that quiet, painful truth is exactly what set the stage for the 4th of July that finally changed everything between us. Last year's reunion should have been the one that finally went right. At least, that's what I kept telling myself while I signed off on payment after payment through the spring. The ranch rental alone cost more than some families spend on an entire summer vacation. Then came the barbecue cruise deposit. Then the fireworks permit and pyrotechnics fee. Then a dozen small extra costs nobody thinks about until the final total lands in your inbox with a due date already circled in red. By the time the 4th of July actually arrived, I had spent just over $14,000. And honestly, the money itself was never really what bothered me. What mattered to me was watching my family actually enjoy being together, without the usual tension I'd learned to brace myself for every single year. For a few hours that day, it genuinely looked like we might make it through without a single complaint. The ranch looked incredible. Smoke drifted up from the barbecue trailer all afternoon. Kids ran barefoot across the yard with sparklers while the adults sat on the porch drinking sweet tea. The pyrotechnics crew was setting up quietly near the tree line, out past the safety perimeter, getting ready for the evening show. Everyone seemed genuinely relaxed. For one hopeful hour, I actually let myself believe this might be the year everything finally held together. I was wrong. Right as the sun started dipping low and the fireworks crew fired off the opening sequence, one of the larger shells misfired, a dud that fizzled weakly instead of exploding the way it was supposed to. It was a minor glitch, the kind that happens with pyrotechnics more often than people realize. But Kyle reacted like the entire evening had been ruined on purpose. Seriously? You couldn't even get a fireworks company that actually works? I looked over at him. One shell misfired, Kyle. That happens sometimes. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. You spent all this money and you couldn't even make sure the finale actually worked? The porch went quiet. I tried to explain, calmly, that pyrotechnics displays occasionally have a dud shell, that it was 1 out of nearly 200, and the rest of the show had gone off exactly as planned. That only seemed to irritate him further. Before I could get another word out, Renee chimed in from her lawn chair. Honestly, Marcus, this is kind of exactly the kind of thing you do. I turned toward her. What is that supposed to mean? She shrugged, like I was the one being unreasonable. You always cut corners somewhere. Cut corners? After spending $14,000 on a reunion, nobody even asked whether I could afford this year. Before I could finish, Our mother added her own opinion from the porch swing. It's honestly kind of on brand for you, Marcus. Something always ends up going wrong. The words hit harder than I expected them to, not because they were new, but because they were so painfully familiar. I had heard versions of this exact sentence for almost a decade. The difference this time was that something inside me finally, quietly, stopped making excuses for all of them. While they kept talking about the misfired shell, I looked around the porch, the barbecue trays, the sweet tea pitchers, the rented lawn games, the cornhole boards flown in from Nashville, the smoker trailer still smoking faintly in the driveway. Every single item on that property had been paid for by me. And yet somehow I was sitting there feeling like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome at his own family's reunion. Not a brother, not a son, just a man expected to keep covering the bill and stay quiet about it afterward. The conversation eventually moved on. The rest of the fireworks display finished without any issues, and everyone cheered like nothing had happened. Coolers were opened. Someone turned on music from a truck stereo, and the evening carried on as if the whole exchange had never taken place. But I couldn't shake what I had just understood, clear as the Texas sky above us. For 10 years, I thought I had been buying family closeness. What I had actually been buying was access, and even that came with a running commentary of complaints. Later that night, after most of the family had gone inside or driven home, I sat alone on the tailgate of my truck at the edge of the property, looking out over the dark hill country. For the first time in years, I stopped asking myself how I could make next year's reunion better. Instead, I asked myself a different question entirely. What would happen if I simply stopped paying for it? Before we go any further, I want your honest take on this. After a night like that, being blamed for one misfired firework out of nearly 200, would you have kept paying the following year? Comment "keep paying" or walk away below, because once I made my decision, there was absolutely no going back for me. By the time spring rolled around again, I had nearly let the promise I made to myself that night fade quietly into the background of a busy season at the stores. Nearly. Then, in early May, the family group chat came roaring back to life. Every year it started exactly the same way. A few messages about dates, a couple of logistics questions about who was driving in from where, and before long, everyone was casually planning a reunion they had absolutely no intention of paying $1 toward. The first message came from Renee. She dropped a listing for an even larger ranch property, this one with a private pond and a covered pavilion. She followed it up a few minutes later with, "This one looks perfect for this year." Not "what do you think?" Not "can we actually afford this together?" Not even "are you still up for hosting again?" Just a quiet, automatic assumption that the tradition and the person funding it would keep going exactly as it always had. A few days later, Kyle started sending his own links. A bigger fireworks package, a live band this time instead of just a portable speaker, a specific brand of custom koozies with the family name printed on them. Every message read less like a suggestion and more like an order form with my name already written on the bottom line. Our mother joined in shortly after, less focused on entertainment and more focused on food. Could we get the same barbecue crew as last year? Could they add a second smoker this time? Could the dessert table be a little nicer than it was before? The conversation rolled on for weeks without a single person ever raising the one question that actually mattered. Who was going to pay for any of it? In their minds, that question had already been settled years ago. Me. As always, the old version of me would have pushed back immediately. I would have argued about the growing cost. I would have explained, again, exactly how unreasonable this had become. This time, I did none of that. I didn't object. I didn't agree. I didn't negotiate a single line item. I simply stayed quiet. Days passed, then weeks. The group chat kept filling up with plans and links and logistics. Nobody noticed my silence. Or if they did, they interpreted it exactly the way they always had. They assumed I was quietly handling everything behind the scenes, the way I had for a full decade. The strangest part was that nobody actually checked. Not once. Nobody sent a message asking, "Marcus, are you good with all this?" Nobody asked whether I'd made the deposit. Nobody asked whether the fireworks permit had actually been filed. They didn't ask because they genuinely didn't believe they needed to. For 10 years, I had trained every one of them to expect it without a second thought. Now I was watching that expectation run entirely on its own momentum, like a machine I had built with my own two hands and simply forgotten to switch off. As June wore on, the reminder emails started arriving in my inbox one after another. The ranch company wanted the final balance. The barbecue crew wanted written confirmation and a deposit. The pyrotechnics company needed a signed contract and half payment up front before they'd even file the permit paperwork. I read every single email carefully. Then I closed each one. No responses. No payments. No explanations sent to anyone. Meanwhile, while everyone else in my family was busy planning a 4th of July they fully expected me to fund without question, I was quietly making plans of my own. And unlike the Hill Country Ranch, this trip was actually going to be paid for, by me, entirely for myself. 10 days before the holiday, I hitched my old aluminum boat to the truck, loaded my dog Duke into the passenger seat, and headed northwest. Not toward Fredericksburg. Not toward another sprawling ranch property with a private pond nobody would swim in except to complain the water was too warm. I drove all the way to a small lake town in Montana, the kind of place where cell service comes and goes, and the loudest sound most evenings is water against a dock. The cabin I rented wasn't impressive by anyone else's standards. 1 bedroom, a screened porch, a small dock, and a view of pine-covered mountains reflected in perfectly still water. For me, that was more than enough. For the first time in a decade, I booked a holiday based entirely on what I actually wanted, not on what everyone else had come to expect from me. The first few days felt strange, almost uncomfortable in a way I wasn't fully prepared for. I kept waiting for something, a complaint, a demand, some last-minute crisis that would somehow, inevitably, become my responsibility to solve from 4 states away. Instead, there was only quiet. Good quiet. The kind that lets you actually hear a loon calling across the water instead of your phone buzzing with group chat notifications. The kind that lets you finish a cup of coffee before the boat even leaves the dock. The kind that reminds you exactly how exhausting a decade of low-grade criticism has actually been, even when you'd convinced yourself you'd gotten used to it. Duke spent most of his time asleep on the dock in a patch of afternoon sun, completely unbothered by any of it. I spent mine fishing, reading on the porch, and slowly getting used to the fact that nobody was texting me to fix a problem I hadn't caused. No expensive requests. No arguments about accommodations. No debates over dessert tables. Just peace. After a few days, I realized something that genuinely surprised me. I wasn't missing the Hill Country reunions at all. I was only missing the idea of what I had always wished those reunions could be, and had never actually turned out to be. The morning of the 4th arrived clear and cool, with mist still rising off the lake. I made coffee, took Duke out on the boat for an hour before the wind picked up, and found myself, for the first time in a decade, not managing a single logistical detail of a family holiday. But throughout the day, I kept glancing at my phone anyway. Not out of worry, because I knew something nobody else in that group chat did. Certain bills had never been paid. Certain permits had never been filed. And sooner or later, somebody was going to find that out in the worst possible way, on the worst possible day to find it out. So while the afternoon moved quietly around me, I found myself checking one thing over and over, the time. Because I knew, almost exactly, when reality was scheduled to arrive at that ranch outside Fredericksburg. By early afternoon, the lake felt completely still. Duke was stretched out on the dock, half asleep. I had nowhere to be, nothing to organize, and nobody demanding updates every 20 minutes. For the first time in years, I wasn't managing a holiday. I was actually inside one. Meanwhile, back in Texas, my family was arriving at the ranch for the reunion. I knew their schedule almost by heart at this point. They always checked in by early afternoon. They always started setting up for the fireworks display around 3 o'clock, right as the pyrotechnics crew was supposed to arrive and begin their safety walkthrough. For 10 years, everything had followed the exact same pattern, like clockwork. This year was going to look very different. The only real question left was how long it would take them to figure that out. At exactly 3 o'clock, my phone lit up on the tailgate beside me. The first call came from Renee. I watched it ring, then stop. 5 seconds later, it started ringing again. Before that second call even ended, Kyle's name appeared, then my mother's, then Renee again. Within minutes, my screen looked like some kind of flashing emergency alert. Call after call, text after text, voicemail after voicemail stacking up faster than I could even glance at the previews. I set my tea down and looked at the growing wall of notifications. Right on schedule. The first text from Renee read, simply, "Call me right now. This isn't funny." The second one wasn't any friendlier. "Where are you? The ranch says there's no reservation." A few minutes later, Kyle sent a message written almost entirely in capital letters, dripping with frustration about a fireworks crew that had apparently never shown up at all. My mother's messages were different. She sounded confused at first, then worried, then genuinely upset as the minutes ticked by. I finally opened one of the voicemails. The situation became clear almost immediately. The ranch had refused them entry at the gate. The final balance had never been paid, and without payment, there was no active reservation, no gate code, no property, no covered pavilion, no private pond. At nearly the same time, they'd apparently learned the barbecue crew had canceled the entire booking 2 weeks earlier, since the deposit deadline had come and gone without a single dollar arriving. No payment, no smoker trailer, no brisket, and the pyrotechnics company, without a signed contract or a filed permit, had never even scheduled the job in the first place. No fireworks, no reunion, just a locked gate, a gravel road, several coolers, and a reality nobody had prepared for. The messages kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. Renee wanted answers. Kyle wanted someone to blame, immediately and loudly. My mother wanted a solution, any solution, as fast as humanly possible. What struck me most wasn't that they were upset. Of course they were upset, standing outside a locked gate on a 100-degree day. It was that every single message assumed the exact same thing, that I would fix it. Even now, even after months of complete silence from me, even after not confirming a single reservation myself, their first instinct wasn't to solve the problem on their own. Their first instinct was to call me, the way it had always been, the way I had quietly trained them to for an entire decade. For 10 years, I had rescued every single holiday crisis before it ever became visible to anyone but me. This time, there was nothing left for me to rescue. Only consequences, arriving exactly on schedule, right on time. I could have picked up immediately. I could have explained everything calmly and found some frantic last-minute fix, another property, another caterer, someone willing to sell them a box of fireworks at the last minute. That's exactly what the old version of me would have done without even thinking twice. Instead, I stood up, walked over to the cooler, and poured myself a fresh glass of iced tea. Then I sat back down on the tailgate, facing the lake. Out on the water, a loon called once and went quiet. Behind me, my phone kept buzzing itself in slow circles across the truck bed. Call, text, voicemail. Call, text, voicemail. For once in my life, I didn't rush to make everything better. I simply sat there and let the silence settle between each notification, the way the evening settled slowly over the lake. Because sometimes the most powerful answer a person can give is no answer at all. And that 4th of July, 3 o'clock said everything I needed it to say. If you've ever had to learn the hard way that gratitude isn't automatic, hit subscribe before the next story finds you. And tell me honestly in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Would you have answered right away, or let them figure it out for themselves, even just for an hour? After nearly an hour of nonstop calls and messages, I finally answered. The moment I picked up, Renee started talking. Although talking isn't really the right word for it. She was demanding answers. "Marcus, where are you? What is going on? Why aren't we at the ranch?" Before I could respond, Kyle cut in from somewhere nearby, his voice sharp with frustration. "This is ridiculous. Everyone's standing outside the gate in 100 degrees. There's no fireworks crew, there's no caterer, nothing." My mother sounded exhausted underneath it all. "Marcus, can you please just tell us what's happening?" For a moment, I simply listened. Not because I was confused, because it was the first time all day any of them had sounded genuinely interested in actually hearing from me, rather than hearing a solution out of me. When the noise finally settled down enough for me to speak, I asked one simple question. "Did any of you pay for the ranch?" The line went quiet. Nobody answered. So I asked another one. "Did any of you pay the barbecue crew or the fireworks company?" More silence. Then, finally, Renee spoke. "That's not really the point right now." I almost laughed, because that was exactly the point. I took a slow sip of iced tea and gave them the only response I genuinely felt they deserved. I assumed whoever kept sending links would be the one paying for what was in them. Silence. Complete, total silence on the other end of the line. For the first time in a decade, not one of them had a comeback ready. Not one had a criticism prepared. Not one had an excuse, because we all understood the same uncomfortable truth at the exact same moment. Not one of them had ever expected to pay. They had all simply expected me to. I finally said what I probably should have said years earlier. I was never ruining these reunions. Nobody interrupted me. I was financing them. The words hung in the air for a long moment. 10 years of frustration compressed into a single sentence. I explained, calmly and without raising my voice, how every holiday had slowly become less about family and more about a growing list of expectations. How every year came with a bigger bill and a smaller amount of appreciation attached to it. How tired I had grown of being treated like a walking inconvenience while I quietly paid for everyone else's picture-perfect 4th of July. The conversation ended almost exactly how you'd expect. Nobody apologized. Nobody admitted they'd done anything wrong. A few sharp words were exchanged, and eventually the call simply disconnected on its own. But even though the conversation itself ended badly, something important had genuinely, finally shifted. For the first time in 10 years, the entire weight of the holiday wasn't sitting on my shoulders anymore. The days after the 4th were quiet in a way I wasn't used to. At first, the messages I received weren't much different in tone from the phone calls had been. There was anger. There was frustration. A few half-hearted attempts to make me feel guilty about ruining the holiday for everyone, especially the grandkids. According to Kyle, I had embarrassed the entire family in front of the ranch's staff. According to Renee, I had created unnecessary drama out of nothing. My mother mostly stayed out of the arguments after that first call, though she did check in a few times, quietly, just to ask how the store business was going. That alone felt different. For the first time in a very long while, someone was asking about me instead of asking me for something. As the weeks passed, the sharpest emotions started to cool down on their own. The initial shock wore off, and reality finally had room to settle in properly. The reunion hadn't fallen apart because I had ruined it. It fell apart because nobody besides me had ever taken responsibility for making it happen in the first place. That distinction mattered a great deal, whether any of them were ready to admit it out loud or not. The following year brought a noticeable, almost startling change. Nobody sent links to bigger ranch properties. Nobody forwarded fireworks packages for me to approve. Nobody simply assumed I would be covering every single cost without discussion. The old expectation had finally, quietly, been broken for good. Some relationships did become more distant afterward, and I won't pretend that part didn't sting. A few conversations grew noticeably shorter. A few small traditions quietly disappeared and were never mentioned again. But something unexpected happened alongside all of that, too. The interactions that did remain started feeling genuinely real for the first time in years. When my siblings called now, they weren't calling because they needed something from me. They were calling because they actually wanted to talk. Those conversations weren't frequent, but they were honest, and honestly, I'd take one sincere phone call over 100 entitled requests any single day of the week. Looking back on it now, the best 4th of July of my adult life wasn't the one with the biggest ranch or the most expensive pyrotechnics show. It wasn't the one with the live band or the custom koozies flown in from Nashville. It was the quiet one, in a one-bedroom cabin on a still Montana lake, with a sleepy dog on the dock and complete peace of mind for the first time in a decade. It was the one where I didn't spend the entire day trying to earn everyone's approval. The one where nobody could blame me for a single little inconvenience. Because for once, there simply wasn't anyone there to blame me at all. Most people assume generosity means saying yes forever, no matter the cost to yourself. I've learned, the hard way, that real generosity also requires boundaries. Because the moment kindness turns into an unspoken expectation, gratitude tends to quietly disappear right along with it. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can possibly do for yourself is step back and let other people carry the responsibilities that were never really yours to begin with. 3 o'clock didn't ruin the 4th of July that year. It simply revealed, once and for all, exactly who had believed that holiday belonged to me, and only to me. If this story hit close to home, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real, honest stories about family, boundaries, and the moment people finally choose themselves.